August 480 BC, 5 days after Leonidas and his 300 fell at Thermopylae. You're a Persian cavalry scout named Dades, riding through the mountain passes of central Greece with what you believe is a simple assignment. Your commander, a general named Hydarnes, has given you orders to hunt down the Greek survivors who fled Thermopylae before the final stand. Intelligence reports suggest maybe 200 or 300 cowards scattered into the mountains. Easy prey. Your force numbers approximately 20,000, a mix of Persian cavalry, median infantry, and immortals reassigned from the main army. You're tracking a group of Greek stragglers through a narrow gorge in the Phocian highlands when you notice something wrong. The tracks you're following don't look panicked. They're deliberate, measured. Almost like they want you to follow them. Then the rocks start falling, not a landslide, boulders, pushed from the clifftops above, each one weighing several hundred pounds, crashing into your column with bone-shattering force. Men and horses are crushed instantly. You hear screaming in Persian and Median, then something worse, Greek war cries echoing off the canyon walls. You look up and see armored figures silhouetted against the sky. They're not running, they're hunting. This isn't a pursuit of cowards fleeing Thermopylae. This is an ambush. And you've just realized that the Greeks you're hunting number closer to 600, not 200. They're Spartans, Thespians, and Thebans, the warriors who were sent away from Thermopylae before the final stand, not because they were cowards, but because Leonidas knew someone had to survive to tell the story and continue the war. This isn't a scene from 300. This is the Battle of the Phocian Highlands, and almost nobody remembers it because it doesn't fit the narrative of noble sacrifice at Thermopylae. This is the story of what happened after the 300 died. This is about 600 Greek warriors who spent 8 days systematically exterminating 20,000 Persian troops in a running battle through the Greek mountains, using terrain, night raids, and savage ambush tactics that would make modern special forces operators nod in respect. The 300 died heroes at Thermopylae. The 600 became something darker, weapons of vengeance who turned the Persian pursuit into a nightmare that survivors would recount in whispers for generations. Before diving into this forgotten chapter of savage asymmetric warfare, if you enjoy learning about the battles that history deliberately forgot because they reveal how brutal ancient combat really was, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. What you're about to hear is the other side of Thermopylae, the side that's all blood and no glory. Here, what you need to understand about the force composition before we get into the carnage. When Leonidas made his final stand at Thermopylae, he wasn't commanding just 300 Spartans. The total Greek force at the pass numbered around 7,000 at its peak, including contingents from Thespiae, Thebes, Phasis, Locris, and other city-states. On the final day, when Leonidas learned the Persians had flanked his position via the mountain path, he dismissed most of these allies. The strategic logic was sound. Someone had to survive to warn the rest of Greece and continue resistance. The Spartans stayed because of their warrior code and because dying in battle was preferable to returning home defeated, but not all Spartans stayed. Leonidas kept his 300-strong personal bodyguard for the final stand, but there were other Spartan forces in the vicinity, support troops, messengers, cavalry scouts, and units that had been operating in the surrounding territories. Historical sources are deliberately vague about these forces because Greek propaganda needed the clean narrative of exactly 300 Spartans dying heroically. The messy truth is that approximately 200 to 250 Spartans survived Thermopylae by being elsewhere when the final battle occurred. Add to this roughly 700 Thespians who refused to abandon the Spartans, about 150 Thebans whose loyalty was questionable, and various other Greek warriors who'd been operating as scouts or foragers. The total survival force numbered somewhere between 600 and 800 warriors. These survivors regrouped approximately 15 miles south of Thermopylae in the Phocian highlands. They were led by a Spartan named Leonidas, a warrior who appears in Herodotus' histories as the man who joked that fighting in the shade would be nice when told Persian arrows would blot out the sun. Leonidas wasn't selected for Leonidas' final 300 because he'd been commanding a scouting detachment during the battle. He returned to find his king dead, his comrades slaughtered, and the Persian army advancing deeper into Greece. According to later accounts, Leonidas gathered the survivors and gave them a choice: retreat south and rejoin the main Greek defensive lines, or stay and make the Persians pay for every mile of Greek soil they marched across. 600 chose to stay, the rest fled south. Nobody judged them for it. Shift your perspective to understand what Leonidas was planning. Thermopylae demonstrated that a small force of heavily armored Greek hoplites could hold terrain against vastly superior numbers if they controlled the choke point. But Thermopylae also proved that static defense ultimately fails when the enemy finds a way around. Leonidas's innovation was to make the entire mountain range the battlefield. No fixed positions, no last stands, just continuous mobile warfare designed to bleed the Persian advance forces while never allowing decisive engagement. Modern military doctrine calls this guerrilla warfare. The Greeks called it mountain fighting. Whatever the name, it was about to become a Persian nightmare. The Persian high command, meanwhile, made a fatal assumption. They believed the Greeks who fled Thermopylae were demoralized cowards who could be easily hunted down and destroyed. Xerxes, the Persian king of kings, was furious that even one Greek had escaped to tell the tale of Thermopylae. He assigned Hydarnes, commander of the Immortals who'd flanked Leonidas' position, to lead a 20,000-man force to track down and annihilate these survivors. It was supposed to be a mop-up operation, not a military campaign. Hydarnes brought mostly cavalry and light infantry optimized for pursuit across open ground. He didn't bring siege equipment or heavy infantry designed for mountain combat. Why would he? He was hunting defeated refugees, not fighting a battle. He was catastrophically wrong about both the mission and the enemy. The first ambush occurred on August 25, 480 BC, approximately 5 days after Thermopylae fell. Hydarnes' advance column, roughly 4,000 cavalry and light infantry, pushed into a gorge in the Cephissus River Valley, tracking Greek movements. The terrain was classic ambush country, narrow valley floor flanked by steep rocky slopes covered in scrub vegetation. The Persians were stretched in a long marching column because the gorge didn't allow for broader formations. Leonidas had his 600 Greeks positioned on both sides of the gorge, hidden among the rocks and vegetation. They waited until the Persian column was fully committed to the confined space, front elements too far forward to retreat, rear elements too far back to support. The attack began with the boulder drop that opened this story. The Greeks had spent hours positioning massive rocks on the cliff edges, propped with wooden supports that could be knocked away simultaneously. When the signal came, a single ram's horn blast, approximately 30 boulders crashed down into the packed Persian column. Each boulder crushed multiple men and horses. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. The Persians panicked, trying to retreat or advance, colliding with each other in the narrow space. Then the Greeks charged down from both sides. I find it incredible that we're exploring these forgotten acts of tactical brutality together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared fascination with how ancient warriors turned terrain into a weapon that multiplied their effectiveness by factors of 10 or more. You're a Greek hoplite named Philippos, one of the 700 Thespians who survived because you'd been on a water run when Thermopylae fell. You're 28 years old, a farmer's son trained in Phalanx warfare since age 12. You're wearing approximately 60 pounds of bronze armor, a Corinthian helmet that restricts your vision to a narrow forward cone, a cuirass covering your torso, greaves on your shins, and carrying a hoplon shield that weighs 16 pounds and a 7-foot spear. You've been crouching behind rocks on this hillside for 3 hours, cramping in your legs, sweat running down your back despite the mountain altitude, listening to the Persian column approach below. When the horn blasts, you knock away the wooden prop holding your boulder, watch it tumble and crash into the enemy below, then you charge downhill. Running downhill in full hoplite armor is barely controlled falling. You're using gravity for momentum, shield held forward, spear pointed ahead. The Persian cavalry below are trapped between the canyon walls and the boulder-strewn ground, horses panicking. You crash into a Persian archer who's trying to knock an arrow. Your shield hits him in the chest with your full body weight plus momentum behind it. You hear ribs crack. He goes down. You stab downward with your spear, catching him in the throat. Blood sprays across your greaves. You step over the body and find your next target, a Persian cavalryman who's lost his horse and is trying to draw his sword. You thrust your spear into his unarmored side just below the ribcage. He screams in Farsi. You twist the spear and rip it out. He collapses, holding his guts. The fighting in the gorge lasts approximately 17 minutes. The Persians can't maneuver, can't form defensive lines, can't retreat because those behind are pushing forward. The Greeks don't form phalanx either. In this broken terrain against disorganized enemies, they fight as individual killers, using their superior armor and training to butcher opponents who can't effectively resist. When the Greeks finally withdraw back up the slopes, approximately 800 Persian soldiers are dead or dying in the gorge. Greek casualties are fewer than 20. The survivors of Hydarne's advance column retreat, carrying tales of Greeks who fight like demons and use the mountains themselves as weapons. Hydarnes learns of the ambush by evening. His response reveals both his competence and his fundamental misunderstanding of what he's facing. He consolidates his remaining forces, approximately 16,000 troops now, and decides to push through the highlands using overwhelming numbers. He'll accept higher casualties, but overwhelm any Greek ambushes through sheer mass. It's sound tactical thinking against conventional opponents. The Greeks aren't conventional opponents. Over the next 7 days, Leonidas and his 600 create what modern military analysts would call a defense in depth using guerrilla tactics. They don't hold fixed positions. They strike and vanish. They attack at night when the Persians are camped, killing sentries, setting fires, causing panic, then disappearing before organized responses can form. They contaminate water sources with animal carcasses, forcing the Persians to detour to find clean water. They start rock slides that block paths, forcing time-consuming detours. They shoot arrows from long range, targeting officers and cavalry horses, then retreat before the Persians can close. Each individual action kills relatively few Persians, but the cumulative effect is devastating. Before diving into the specific night raids that broke Persian morale, consider checking out this next video on the screen about ancient psychological warfare and how armies used terror tactics to defeat larger forces. The mental warfare component of what the Greeks did to the Persians in these mountains is as important as the physical casualties. The second major engagement happens on August 28th, 3 days after the initial ambush. The Persians are camped in a mountain valley, exhausted from days of fruitless pursuit. Hydarnes has established what he thinks is a secure perimeter, sentries posted, cavalry picketed, officers bunked in the center of the camp. Around 2 a.m., when human circadian rhythms are at their lowest point, the Greeks attack, not a full assault, a raid. Approximately 150 Greeks infiltrate the Persian camp from multiple directions, moving silently in the darkness. They've removed their armor for noise discipline, carrying only swords, daggers, and small shields. They target 3 specific areas: the cavalry horses, the command tents, and the water supplies. The horse attack is particularly brutal. Greek raiders slash the tendons of picketed cavalry horses, crippling them instantly. A wounded horse screams. It's a high-pitched, terrifying sound that panics nearby animals. Within minutes, hundreds of horses are shrieking, rearing, breaking their tethers, trampling through the camp. The Persians stumble from their tents into chaos. Then the Greeks hit the command area. They kill 4 senior officers before the Persian guard can organize a response. They set fire to supply wagons. They kill sentries who try to raise the alarm. The raid lasts less than 15 minutes before the Greeks vanish back into the darkness. Persian casualties: approximately 300 dead, 200 wounded, and 400 horses crippled or killed. Greek casualties: 11 dead, 18 wounded. Hydarnes tries to retaliate with a dawn pursuit, but his cavalry is crippled and his troops are exhausted from the nighttime chaos. The Greeks stay visible just beyond bow range, leading the Persians deeper into the mountains, stretching their supply lines, exhausting them with false trails and constant harassment. This is the grind-down phase of the campaign, not dramatic set-piece battles, but continuous attrition that bleeds the Persian force white. Every day, the Persians lose 100 to 200 men to ambushes, night raids, accidents caused by exhaustion, and desertions. Every day, they cover less ground. Every day, morale deteriorates further. Let's be very clear about what Leonidas is doing here. This isn't honorable hoplite warfare. This is terrorism. The Greeks are deliberately targeting non-combatants in the Persian baggage train, killing cooks, torturing captured scouts for information, mutilating bodies, and leaving them for the Persians to find as psychological warfare. They're fighting by different rules than the set-piece battles Greek warfare was known for, and they're doing it because they know they can't win a conventional engagement. This is total war waged by a numerically inferior force that's weaponized its intimate knowledge of the terrain and its willingness to abandon conventional honor codes. If you made it this far, you're a true history enthusiast who appreciates that ancient warfare was far darker and more complex than the heroic narratives suggest. Please verify your subscription now. It really helps the channel keep these forgotten stories of savage mountain warfare alive. The third major engagement, the one that breaks Persian cohesion, occurs on September 1st, 480 BC. Hydarne's force, now reduced to approximately 12,000 effective combatants, attempts to exit the highlands via a pass near Mount Parnassus. Leonidas has anticipated this route and prepared his most elaborate trap. The pass is narrow with steep sides, similar to Thermopylae but shorter, maybe 400 yards of confined space. The Greeks position approximately 400 hoplites in phalanx formation, blocking the pass exit. The remaining 200 Greeks are hidden on the slopes with stockpiles of javelins, rocks, and bows. The Persians see the phalanx blocking the pass and make the logical tactical decision. They'll storm it with overwhelming numbers. They can see it's only 400 Greeks. They have 12,000 men. They mass approximately 3,000 infantry for the assault, planning to overwhelm the phalanx through sheer weight of numbers. As the Persian infantry advances into the pass, the Greeks on the slopes begin their barrage. Javelins, arrows, and rocks rain down on the flanks of the Persian column. The confined space means there's nowhere to dodge. Men fall with spear shafts through their backs, arrows in their necks, skulls crushed by thrown rocks. The Persian advance slows as casualties mount. The men at the front are pushing against the Greek phalanx shield wall, an immovable barrier of overlapping shields backed by the mass of armored bodies. The men at the rear are being slaughtered by the bombardment from the slopes. The middle is crushing together, men unable to use their weapons because there's no room to swing a sword or thrust a spear. The situation is nearly identical to Thermopylae, except this time the Persians don't have the option of flanking because there is no alternate route. The pass is the only viable exit from the highlands. They either break through or retreat. They try for 3 hours. Wave after wave of Persian infantry crashes against the Greek phalanx and breaks like water against stone. The phalanx doesn't advance, it just holds position, shields locked, spears stabbing out at any Persian who gets close enough. The men in the front rank of the phalanx rotate out every 15 minutes, replaced by fresh warriors from the ranks behind. This is standard phalanx doctrine. No individual warrior can sustain that intensity of combat for more than short periods, so you cycle fighters to maintain effectiveness. The Persians have no such system. Their frontline troops fight until exhausted, then are trampled by their own reinforcements pushing from behind. By midday, approximately 2,000 Persian soldiers are dead in the pass. The Greeks have lost maybe 30. Hydarne finally orders a withdrawal. His army retreats back into the highlands, demoralized and running low on supplies. That night, the Greeks attack the Persian camp again. This time, the raid is purely psychological. They don't try to kill many Persians. They just make noise, start fires on the camp perimeter, shoot flaming arrows into the darkness, then vanish. The Persians spend the entire night in terrified alertness, unable to sleep, jumping at every sound. By dawn, Hydarne's army is a psychological wreck. Consider hitting that like button if you're appreciating how the Greeks turned the pursuit against them into a campaign of systematic destruction that violated every conventional warfare principle of their era. This is the dark side of Spartan military excellence that popular culture doesn't want to acknowledge. September 3rd, 480 BC, Hydarne makes his final decision. His force has been reduced to fewer than 10,000 effective troops. His supply lines are overstretched and vulnerable. His men are exhausted, traumatized, and increasingly unwilling to advance into terrain where every hillside might hide Greek ambushers. He orders a full retreat back toward the Persian main army. The Greeks pursue, not to engage in pitched battle, but to continue the harassment. For the next 5 days, the Persian retreat is a running nightmare. The Greeks attack the rearguard continuously, forcing the Persians to constantly turn and defend, slowing their retreat to a crawl. They shoot arrows into the packed column from long range. They roll boulders down slopes into the marching troops. They attack at night, every night, denying sleep. The final massacre happens on September 7th, 480 BC, when the retreating Persians try to cross the Cephissus River at a ford. The Greeks have positioned archers on the far bank and spearmen hidden in the vegetation along the riverbanks. As the Persians wade into the river, water waist-deep, current strong enough to make movement difficult, the Greeks attack. Men in water can't dodge arrows, can't raise shields effectively, can't run. The river runs red with blood as approximately 500 Persians are killed in the crossing. The survivors abandon equipment, supplies, even wounded comrades to escape across the river. Once on the far bank, they run, not march, run. The pursuit is over. The Greeks let them go. When Hydarnes finally reaches the Persian main army's position, he reports having lost more than 10,000 men from his original 20,000-strong force. The losses occurred over 8 days of continuous mountain warfare against an enemy that numbered fewer than 600 warriors. The kill ratio is approximately 17-1 in favor of the Greeks. By comparison, Thermopylae, the battle everyone remembers, achieved maybe a 20-1 kill ratio before the Greeks were wiped out. The Phocian Highlands campaign was nearly as lethal, but the Greeks survived and the Persians were routed. Yet this battle is forgotten while Thermopylae is immortalized. Why? Because Thermopylae gave Greece a myth of heroic sacrifice. The Phocian Highlands revealed the savage pragmatism that actual victory required. Leonidas and his 300 died gloriously, facing the enemy head-on, never retreating. They became symbols of honor and courage. Defiance and his 600 survived by ambushing, night raiding, terrorizing, and using tactics that violated the hoplite warfare code. They became weapons, not heroes. Greek propaganda needed the noble sacrifice narrative to inspire resistance. They didn't need stories about Greeks mutilating Persian corpses and poisoning water supplies. Here's where we need to stop and correct a massive misconception about ancient warfare. Popular culture, especially the movie 300, portrays the Greeks, particularly Spartans, as honorable warriors who fought by strict codes. The reality is that ancient warfare had no Geneva Conventions, no rules of engagement beyond what individual commanders chose to enforce. The same Spartans who died heroically at Thermopylae were equally capable of the savage guerrilla warfare demonstrated in the Phocian Highlands. The difference wasn't moral character, it was tactical necessity. At Thermopylae, the mission required holding ground. In the Highlands, the mission required destroying an enemy force through any means available. Defiance understood something that modern audiences struggle with. Honor is a luxury of strength. When you have superior numbers, better logistics, and the strategic initiative, you can afford to fight honorably. When you're outnumbered 30-1, survival requires abandoning honor and embracing pragmatic brutality. The 600 Greeks who fought in the Phocian Highlands after Thermopylae were no less courageous than the 300 who died at the pass. They just chose a different path, living to kill another day rather than dying gloriously in a single stand. The aftermath of the Phocian Highlands campaign reveals the strategic impact. Xerxes' invasion of Greece ultimately failed. His navy was destroyed at Salamis in September 480 BC, and his land forces were crushed at Plataea in 479 BC. But the Persian defeat was caused by cumulative factors, not single battles. Every Greek victory, no matter how small, contributed to Persian demoralization and logistical strain. The Phocian Highlands campaign forced the Persians to detach 20,000 troops for a pursuit operation that accomplished nothing except getting half of them killed. Those troops weren't available at Salamis or Plataea. The supplies wasted trying to hunt down Defiance's 600 weren't available to feed Xerxes' main army. Modern military historians who study the Persian invasion often focus on the great set-piece battles, Thermopylae, Salamis, Plataea, but wars are won through cumulative effects. The Phocian Highlands was one of perhaps a dozen similar small-scale campaigns where Greek forces used local knowledge and unconventional tactics to bleed the Persian invasion force. Individually, none of these actions were decisive. Collectively, they made Persian victory impossible by turning Greece into a strategic nightmare where every mile advanced cost disproportionate casualties and resources. This brings us to one of the most overlooked aspects of the Persian Wars. The Greeks won not because they were better warriors than the Persians. Persian troops were professional soldiers from a military tradition that had conquered the largest empire in human history up to that point. The Greeks won because they weaponized their homeland. Every mountain pass became Thermopylae. Every coastal water became Salamis. Every piece of Greek territory turned into a tactical nightmare for invaders who didn't know the terrain and couldn't secure their supply lines against continuous harassment. Please comment below to let me know where you're listening from and whether your military history education included any discussion of Greek guerrilla warfare during the Persian invasion. Most curricula focus exclusively on the big set-piece battles and completely ignore the unconventional warfare that made those victories possible. Let me give you the fates of the key figures. Dionysus survived the Phocian Highlands campaign and rejoined the main Greek army in time for the Battle of Plataea in 479 BC. He was killed there, leading a Spartan unit in the final charge that broke the Persian line. So he got his glorious hoplite death eventually, just delayed by a year. Hydarnes, the Persian commander who led the pursuit, was not executed or punished for his losses. Xerxes understood that the defeat was the result of impossible tactical conditions, not incompetence. Hydarnes fought at Plataea and survived the battle, eventually returning to Persia, where he continued serving in the Immortals. He's recorded as dying of natural causes around 465 BC. The 600 Greeks who fought in the highlands dispersed after the campaign. Most rejoined their home city militias. Approximately 200 of them died at subsequent battles over the next year. The survivors returned to their normal lives, farming, trading, raising families. Greek society didn't celebrate them as heroes because their methods were too disturbing to fit the narrative of honorable hoplite warfare. There were no monuments erected, no poems composed, no histories written about the Phocian Highlands. The battle faded into obscurity, remembered only in scattered references in military texts and the oral traditions of the families whose ancestors participated. But there's a fragment from a later Spartan text, probably written around 420 BC, 60 years after the events, that captures what the survivors thought about their experience. The fragment is attributed to one of Dionysus' men, though the specific author is unknown. The 300 died heroes at the hot gates. We 600 lived as demons in the mountains. Leonidas bought time with his blood. We bought time with theirs. His name will echo forever. Ours will be forgotten. We accept this. Glory belongs to the dead who never compromised. Survival belongs to the living who did what was necessary. That quote, if authentic, and historians debate this, reveals the psychological toll of the campaign. These warriors knew they'd abandoned the honorable warfare code their society celebrated. They'd ambushed enemies from hiding. They'd killed in darkness. They'd mutilated corpses and terrorized defeated foes. They did this because strategic necessity required it, but they understood that their society would neither celebrate nor forgive these actions. So they kept quiet, lived with their memories, and let history forget them rather than contaminate the heroic narrative with uncomfortable truths about how wars are actually won. This proves one thing: history remembers what cultures want to remember, not what actually happened. Thermopylae survives in memory because it reinforces comfortable myths about honor and sacrifice. The Phocian Highlands is forgotten because it reveals the savage pragmatism that actual military victory requires. Both battles were fought by Greeks against Persians. Both were tactically brilliant. Both contributed to Greek victory, but only one fit the story Greece wanted to tell about itself. Check out this next video on the screen about ancient guerrilla warfare tactics and how militarily inferior forces used terrain and unconventional methods to defeat larger armies. The principles the Greeks demonstrated in the Phocian Highlands appear in military campaigns from ancient China to Vietnam. Picture Dionysus at the Battle of Plataea in 479 BC, 1 year after the Phocian Highlands. He's back in full hoplite armor, standing in the Phalanx formation, fighting the way Spartan society celebrates. When the order comes to charge the Persian line, he runs forward with his comrades, shield locked, spear leveled, shouting the battle cry. This is honorable warfare. This is how heroes fight. A Persian spear catches him in the throat, punches through his windpipe, and he goes down in the dust. He bleeds out in approximately 4 minutes, surrounded by the sounds of clashing bronze and screaming men. Did he choose this? Did he deliberately seek the glorious death at Plataea because he needed to redeem himself for the unheroic guerrilla warfare in the highlands? Or was it just chance, the random collision of bodies and blades that determines who lives and who dies in ancient combat? We don't know. The sources don't say. But there's something symbolic about a warrior who survived savage mountain warfare by abandoning honor codes, finally dying in a conventional hoplite battle that fit every cultural expectation of how heroes should fight. I want you to remember the Phocian Highlands. Remember that 600 Greek warriors destroyed a Persian force more than 30 times their size over 8 days of continuous combat in the Greek mountains. Remember that they did it using tactics that violated every principle of honorable warfare their culture celebrated. Remember that they survived to tell the story, but chose not to, leaving the glory to the 300 who died at Thermopylae while they lived with the knowledge of what they'd done to achieve victory. Most importantly, remember that military history is sanitized. The battles we celebrate are chosen to reinforce cultural values, not to accurately represent how wars are won. Thermopylae is remembered because dying heroically is inspirational. The Phocian Highlands is forgotten because surviving through savage guerrilla warfare is disturbing. Both represent different aspects of Greek resistance to Persian invasion. Both were necessary, both were brilliant, but only one became legend. The 600 understood this. They fought their campaign, achieved their mission, and accepted obscurity as the price of victory. They didn't need monuments or poems. They had the satisfaction of knowing that 10,000 Persian soldiers died in those mountains, that the invasion was weakened, that Greece survived partly because of what they did in the darkness and the ambushes and the terror raids that no one wanted to remember. That's the real legacy of the Phocian Highlands, not the tactical details or the casualty counts, but the uncomfortable truth that survival often requires abandoning the values we claim to fight for. The 300 died defending honor. The 600 lived by sacrificing it. History celebrates the 300. The 600 saved Greece. If you want to understand ancient warfare beyond the Hollywood myths and nationalist propaganda, you have to study the battles that cultures deliberately forgot. The Phocian Highlands is one of dozens of similar campaigns, small, savage, effective, that actually determined the outcome of wars while the big dramatic battles got the glory. These forgotten battles reveal what military professionals have always known. Wars are won through cumulative attrition, not single heroic stands. And attrition is boring, brutal, and incompatible with heroic narratives. Please hit subscribe and turn on notifications if you want more content that explores the forgotten, uncomfortable, and deliberately obscured aspects of military history. The algorithm needs to know that there's an audience for historical truth beyond the sanitized myths. 600 Greeks, 20,000 Persians, 8 days. 7 major ambushes, continuous night raids, approximately 10,000 enemy casualties, Greek losses under 100, and nobody remembers because the story is too dark, too savage, too incompatible with the myth of honorable ancient warfare. But it happened. The mountains of Phasis ran red with Persian blood in late summer 480 BC, while Greece celebrated the heroic sacrifice at Thermopylae. The 300 became legend. The 600 became ghosts, invisible warriors who did the necessary evil that made Greek victory possible. Remember them. Remember what they did. Remember that honor is a luxury and survival requires compromises that comfortable societies prefer to forget. Remember that the battles history celebrates are chosen by the victors to reinforce preferred narratives, and the truly important battles often vanish from memory because they reveal uncomfortable truths about human nature and the conduct of war. The 300 died heroes at Thermopylae. The 600 lived as demons in the Phocian Highlands. Both saved Greece. Only one is remembered. Now you know the story of the one that was forgotten, the one that mattered just as much. The one that reveals what victory actually costs when you're outnumbered, desperate, and willing to abandon everything except the mission itself. The Battle of the Phocian Highlands. The slaughter nobody remembers. The campaign that proved the Greeks could win ugly when winning pretty wasn't possible. 600 warriors. 20,000 enemy soldiers. 8 days of savage mountain warfare. And the conscious choice of an entire culture to forget it ever happened because the truth was too brutal for the myths they wanted to tell about themselves. That's the real lesson. Not the tactics or the terrain or the casualties, but the fact that humans consistently choose comfortable lies over uncomfortable truths, and entire battles can vanish from history when they don't fit the narrative. The 600 accepted this. They fought their war in the shadows and let the 300 have the glory. That's the final irony. the warriors who survived by being ruthlessly practical were also practical enough to understand that their contribution would be erased, and they accepted it as the price of doing what needed to be done. Honor belongs to the 300. Victory belongs to the 600. Memory belongs to the ones who died cleanly. The future was saved by the ones who lived dirty. Remember the Phocian highlands. Remember the 600. Remember that history is written by survivors who choose which truths to tell and which to bury in the mountains where they happened.